On a dark and stormy night, somewhere in the American Midwest, a bald, middle-aged man decided to attempt a challenge. He was an ordinary man, but this was no ordinary challenge. This was a challenge, not of the body, but of the mind. A challenge of the spirit. The man knew the challenge would test both his patience and his sanity, but his future weighed on the outcome of this challenge. Therefore, he had no choice but to overcome his fears and go boldly into the unknown. What was waiting for him on the other side of the veil, well...
Warning: the following video contains content that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now that you have a taste of what I've been going through over the past few months, let's talk about some hard platinum trophies. The first game we're going to talk about is Dead Space 2. It's easy to look at the Dead Space series in 2026 and see the greatness that was always there, but it started from very humble beginnings. The original Dead Space in 2008, now considered to be one of the greatest survival horror games ever made, did not do well commercially at launch. With less than 200,000 copies sold in the first month, Dead Space was the first attempt from developer Visceral Games, previously known as Redwood Shores, to make a survival horror game. And even though the initial sales numbers didn't reflect it, they absolutely nailed it. The original Dead Space was tense, unsettling, brutal, gory, and yet still cinematic, beautiful, and riveting where it wanted to be. I got the Platinum Trophy for the original Dead Space back in 2010. It was my third Platinum ever. I wasn't a hardcore trophy hunter at this point, and horror games have never really been my favorite, so that tells you just how good this game was. I wanted to be scared shitless while also having a ton of fun, and Dead Space delivered. It set a new standard for what I expected from horror games. In 2011, Visceral released the highly anticipated sequel, Dead Space 2. EA reportedly dropped $60 million marketing this game, some of which was focused around these "your mom will hate this game" ads. Some people point to this as part of the reason for Dead Space 2's failure, but I personally thought it was kind of funny. Nevertheless, the game was considered a commercial failure and likely contributed to the eventual cancellation of the series. And it's a damn shame because Dead Space 2 is a great sequel. It's too bad when a game is really good, it's clearly made by very talented people, it gets rated highly by both critics and players, but it costs a lot of money to make and doesn't sell a ton of copies, and therefore it's considered a failure by the suits. By all accounts, both Dead Space 1 and 2 are really good games, but the math just didn't math, and when EA asked Visceral to include co-op and a more action-heavy focus in Dead Space 3, well, fans didn't love it, and the series eventually died for a decade before seeing a slight resurgence with the Dead Space remake in 2023. I played Dead Space 2 way back in 2011, about 3 months after it came out, and I managed to earn 34 trophies on my first playthrough. But the Dead Space 2 Platinum always made me nervous. Dead Space 2's hardcore mode has been infamous for its difficulty since the PS3 days. I put it off for 15 years, hoping one day I'd muster up enough courage to return to it, and the Hard Platinum series was the perfect opportunity for me to finally face my fears and tackle this challenge. I sometimes struggle with understanding the large-scale context and setting of a game series, especially when I play multiple games in that series at different points many years apart. When I'm playing through a game, especially for the first time, I usually will listen to all the dialogue during quests and other NPC interactions, but I typically don't read every text collectible or sit and listen to every audio collectible. I could tell you that Dead Space is about an engineer who boards a ship and discovered it's filled with terrifying, gnarly monsters, and he has to kill them all with really cool weapons, but I couldn't tell you anything about the context of the story. What year is it? What planet are we on or near? Why is the Ishimura here in the first place? All of these details are actually pretty important to the story of Dead Space 2. And to be clear, this is probably all mentioned in the game somewhere, but it's been 15 years since I played the original Dead Space, so a lot of those details have been lost to me. I also generally struggle to follow an overarching story when I play multiple games in a series many years apart. I love deep stories that span across multiple games. But I've also played a lot of games in my day, and the vast majority of them I've only played once. And whether it's old age or some kind of attention deficit disorder, I struggle to hold on to those details, especially many years later. Dead Space specifically also has a lot of supplemental media like spin-off games, books, comics, and even movies that go deeper into the story, which of course I haven't experienced myself, but that are important in understanding the backstory of the game's universe. For these reasons, when I do these videos and talk about a game's story, I usually need to do a bit of research on the plot outside of just playing the game. And honestly, it's slowly becoming one of my favorite parts of this series. I won't go too deep into the plot of the first game because that could be an entire video on its own, but it's important to set the stage to understand what's going on in Dead Space 2. Dead Space 1 has you playing as Isaac Clarke, an engineer in the year 2508. You board a derelict mining ship, the USG Ishimura, where your girlfriend Nicole is a medical officer. You quickly find out that most of the crew is dead, or worse. This was all caused by an object called the Red Marker. This Red Marker is a weaponized version of an ancient alien artifact discovered by humans centuries earlier that turns people near it into horrifying necromorphs, creatures with spears for limbs. Isaac's original goal in Dead Space 1 was to find his girlfriend, but it ends with him killing a ton of necromorphs and destroying the Red Marker along with the planet it's on, Aegis 7. 3 years later, we resume that story with Dead Space 2. Isaac awakens on the Sprawl, which is a space station near Titan, one of Saturn's moons, and it's infested with necromorphs. This guy just can't catch a break. Imagine spending a whole game fighting these things and destroying a marker, just to wake up to the same nightmare 3 years later. We quickly learn that EarthGov, a governmental body that oversees Earth and all its extraterrestrial colonies, commissioned a scientist, Dr. Hans Tiedemann, to help recreate the marker from Aegis 7, using blueprints that were imprinted into Isaac's mind during his first encounter with it. One thing we can be sure of when it comes to megacorporations or world governments, or even people in general, is that they love to play with fire. They discover an ancient alien technology that brainwashes anybody nearby and turns them into horrifying, murdering monsters. Then they spend countless lives and resources to destroy it. And what do? They make another one. Sounds about right. At the start of the game, Dana Le Guin, an unfamiliar voice, helps guide Isaac to safety and explains the dire situation to him. Isaac also meets a few other characters who guide him along the way to find and stop Dr. Tiedemann. Nolan Strauss, an EarthGov scientist, is descending into madness caused by the marker, but claims he knows how to destroy it. Ellie Langford, a pilot, helps Isaac access various parts of the station in order to find and destroy the marker and escape. Throughout the game, Isaac is plagued by hallucinations of Nicole, his girlfriend from the first game. In these visions, Nicole begs Isaac to make them whole. This turns out to be the Red Marker speaking to Isaac, and it refers to an event known as the Convergence, which is explored deeper in Dead Space 3. Cultists that worship the markers, known as unitologists, believe this convergence event will lead to an evolution of the human form into something that transcends our physical limits, almost like becoming one with God. The Convergence event nears as the story of Dead Space 2 progresses and more necromorphs are created, and it's on Isaac to stop it before it's too late. In the process, Isaac will have to contend with swarms of said necromorphs, as well as unitologist cultists and other maniacal humans remaining on the station who are succumbing to the marker's influence. Dead Space 2 has all the hallmarks of a great survival horror game. Dimly lit corridors, loud jump scares, restricted inventory space, limited resources, especially on higher difficulties, grotesque and mutilated enemies, and most importantly, psychological terror. This game will have you slowly inching forward through each section, as if going slowly or quietly will somehow trick the game into not spawning these terrifying necromorphs. After a few hours of playing, you come to expect a necromorph ambush every few minutes, and yet each one still has a startling effect thanks to the tension Visceral builds into every step of this story. The original Dead Space introduced the innovative dismemberment mechanic, and of course it's back in Dead Space 2. This is maybe the thing that Dead Space is best known for besides just being scary as hell. Enemy torsos act as an ammunition sink in a game where scarce resources is a defining characteristic of its genre, and firing a bunch of bullets into a necromorph's body is a surefire way to run out of ammo and get yourself killed. Shooting off the limbs is the easiest and sometimes only way to defeat these terrifying creatures. To my knowledge, this was the first game that had this kind of mechanic, and it's a great way to increase tension in even the most basic combat encounters. Lots of horror games have incorporated weak spots on enemies. Resident Evil, for example, often gives you a giant orange pustule sticking out of an enemy, so it's blatantly obvious where you need to shoot for maximum damage. But using enemy limbs as a way to not just kill enemies but slow them down is genius. An enemy sprinting at you can be neutralized quickly with a couple powerful leg shots, and then efficiently executed with an additional shot or two or a head stomp depending on your mood. Once the initial anxiety wears off, one of the most fun parts about Dead Space 2 is the catalog of weapons you can use. Isaac has access to a diverse arsenal of weapons, which can be unlocked by first finding its schematic and then purchasing the weapon from a vending machine style store with credits. All the weapons from the original Dead Space return, with a few additions. The weapons are exactly the kind you would expect from an engineer in space 400 plus years in the future. All of these weapons have secondary firing modes triggered by the R2 button, which really opens up so many different loadout options. The first of these futuristic high-tech weapons is the plasma cutter, which is your default weapon and, by many metrics, one of the best weapons in the game. It fires like a basic pistol, and while it's a simple weapon, it will be your trusty sidekick in just about every Dead Space game, even on harder difficulties. Pressing the alternate fire will alternate the weapon between horizontal and vertical firing modes, indicated by 3 small dots on the screen, and you'll need both since enemy limbs stick out every which way. Next we have the javelin gun, which fires spikes that can impale enemies to walls, and it's also good for hitting small, exposed body parts of an armored enemy, like the Big Back Brute. This weapon outputs very high damage, but in a very small area, so being able to aim is kind of important, at least until you have it upgraded. The alternate fire will send an electrical shock across the javelins you've fired, electrocuting any enemies caught between. When fully upgraded, the javelins will also explode at the end. The high damage of the primary fire and the large AoE damage and stun potential of the alternate firing mode makes this a surprisingly versatile weapon. The line gun fires a projectile in a long horizontal line. Call of Duty Advanced Warfare added a weapon like this in Zombies, and I thought it was so cool. Whether it's necromorphs or zombies, there's just something satisfying about chopping a monster in half at the waist and watching them try to crawl towards you with their arms. The alternate fire throws down a mine, which is great for groups of enemies, provided you can stay out of the blast radius. Oh yes, your explosives in Dead Space 2 can absolutely kill you. There are lots of explosive weapons, and every single one can lead to accidental self-unaliving if you're not careful. The pulse rifle is essentially an energy-powered assault rifle, great for large groups of weak enemies, and low recoil combined with large capacity also makes it viable for just about any encounter. This is a solid all-around weapon. The alternate fire shoots out an impact grenade, which is even riskier than the mines from the line gun. It's very tempting to shoot a necromorph in the chest with a grenade launcher, but when it sends you flying back with a sliver of health left, or even worse, in a million pieces, you'll wish you had just stuck with the primary firing mode. When properly controlled, however, the grenade launcher can be very effective in clearing groups of standard enemies, as well as the more durable ones. The Ripper is arguably the most badass weapon in the game. It fires out a giant saw blade which, as you can imagine, basically makes it a chainsaw without a chain. The alternate fire will shoot out a blade which is also great for chopping off limbs. I didn't really use this one much, but if you want to slaughter evil masses in the most badass way possible, you can't go wrong with the Ripper. Next up we have the Detonator, which launches proximity mines. This is a new weapon, not in the original Dead Space, and while it's not a very good primary weapon, it can be a lifesaver for specific encounters. For example, there are some annoying enemies called stalkers that try to flank you and eventually they'll sprint at you. The Detonator is their kryptonite. Stalkers can be hard to deal with if you're surrounded and pinned down, but if you can get your back to them and deploy a detonator mine, the stalkers will sprint right into the mine's laser. Like all other explosive weapons, they can absolutely wreck your shit if you lose track of where you have mines deployed, but thankfully the alternate fire lets you disarm the mines you've already deployed. The Seeker rifle is a semi-automatic sniper rifle that functions similarly to the Javelin, that is, high damage to a single point target. The alternate fire lets you zoom in to a moderate distance, and the saving grace of this weapon is that it can actually one-shot basic necros with a torso shot even on the hardest difficulty. Once it's fully upgraded, combined with the zoom, it has one of the highest damage outputs of any gun in the game, and the ammo is relatively cheap. Its semi-automatic firing mode makes this weapon viable for a wider range of encounters than your average sniper rifle. The Force Gun is one of the more futuristic weapons we get access to, and it's a high damage, high spread weapon. I didn't use this one a ton, but a lot of people swear by this one, and I hear it can carry you through a lot of the game if used correctly. The Contact Beam is a futuristic, high damage weapon that needs to be charged up before firing. which is definitely a drawback. The contact beam really comes in handy when you fully upgrade the alternate fire. This attack will obliterate any enemy in your immediate vicinity, as well as send out a stasis pulse that will drastically slow down all enemies in a circle around you. This weapon was my oh shit button in Dead Space 2, and it works flawlessly. The ammo is extremely expensive, which sounds like a disadvantage. However, early on when you don't really need it, you can sell the expensive ammo, use that money to pay for upgrades, and then later on, when upgrades are no longer an issue, it's usually no problem to buy more ammo if you need it. It's incredibly powerful, and it can carry you through the latest and hardest parts of the game. And lastly, it wouldn't be a great monster game without the trusty old flamethrower. Not much to say about this one. This is another fun one to use that often gets slept on. The alternate fire shoots out a timed explosive that causes lasting burn damage to any enemies in the blast radius. I love using flamethrowers, but in most games it's another weapon that can really burn you if you're not careful. No pun intended. It's very easy to set yourself on fire, which is generally considered to be hazardous to your health. Weapons can be upgraded at specialized benches using power nodes, which are found throughout levels, and they can also be purchased from the store. Upgrades include damage, reload speed, capacity, and there's usually an upgrade specific to that weapon's alternate firing mode that makes it significantly more powerful. This incentivizes a player to fully upgrade a weapon in order to maximize its potential. I was surprised at how well balanced the weapons are in Dead Space 2. And I felt like you could have a viable loadout with any combination of weapons if you know what you're doing. Once they're fully upgraded, every weapon in the game can be really powerful when used to its fullest potential. There's so much disagreement about what the best weapon in the game is, and in my opinion, that's a great thing. You can make an argument for many of the weapons in the game to be the best, and it depends entirely on your gameplay style and personal preference. In general, an effective loadout is going to have at least one weapon that's your standard run and gun weapon, and a second weapon that's your backup oh shit panic button. That's more appropriate for tight spaces or where you might be crowded by deadly enemies. Multiple weapons in Dead Space 2 can provide either one of these functions. It's even entirely possible to complete full hardcore mode runs with only the starter plasma cutter, because of the way the game prioritizes ammo drops based on the weapons you're carrying. Only having one weapon, the starter weapon, seems like a major disadvantage, but Dead Space 2 compensates for that by giving you more ammo for it and freeing up more upgrade nodes for your other equipment. There was a trophy in the original Dead Space for doing a run with only the plasma cutter, and while there is no trophy in the second one, it's still entirely possible to do, though probably not easy. Your health is displayed on the back of your suit using a colored gauge that drains when you take damage.
Your rig is red. It's red.
You can find suit schematics throughout the game which give you access to additional armor suits that you can then buy in the store. Suits improve your armor and inventory space, as well as give unique perks. The first suit you'll get access to is the engineering suit. If you have the Severed DLC, you'll also get access to the patrol suit from the start. This suit has some additional advantages, but I elected not to use any of the DLC bonus items on my hardcore run, just to have a more pure and challenging experience. Stasis is a futuristic ability that lets Isaac drastically slow down enemies and other objects. This will be needed for certain environmental puzzles and can be a lifesaver when dealing with fast or charging enemies. It's a lot easier to hit a flailing necromorph limb when it's not sprinting towards you. Like your health, your stasis gauge is displayed on the back of your suit. It'll refill very slowly on its own, otherwise it can be recharged using consumable stasis packs or a stationary recharging station. Stasis can be upgraded to improve the duration or the number of uses you can get out of a full charge. Telekinesis is another ability that allows you to pick up and launch objects, from explosive canisters to javelins and even necromorph limbs. Telekinesis allows you to pin enemies to walls and deal high damage without using any ammo. In addition to being used as a weapon, telekinesis will also be useful in solving certain environmental puzzles. Dead Space 2 throws a whole host of different enemy types at you. Among them are the standard necromorphs, leaping necromorphs, pukers, exploding necromorphs, quick necromorphs that sprint at you, and worst of all, unkillable necromorphs. Yes, the dreaded regenerators return from Dead Space 1 to add even more stress to some later fights. Brutes, Guardians, and Dividers also return from Dead Space 1. Enemies spawn into a room in a multitude of ways, but usually from vents on the ceiling, walls, or floor. And in many cases they wait until you get close before they pop out. Your first playthrough is pure anxiety maxing, tiptoeing through each room, knowing a necromorph is going to jump out at you every few minutes, but not knowing exactly from where. As terrifying as the enemies are, the real nightmare fuel in Dead Space 2 and the series as a whole is the environment and the setting. Every room you enter, you just can't wait to get out of it. You walk into a room and you see multiple bodies on the ground. You know a couple of these bastards are fake dead, meaning they're going to jump at you the second you get close to them. There's blood and viscera and other unknown putrescence covering the walls and floors. You hear weird gurgling noises and babies crying in the distance. Babies? Suddenly I'm in a daycare center inside a school. Exploding babies. Terrifying packs of necrotic children. Pure nightmare fuel. Also probably the theme of a deathcore song I would love, but I digress. Even the save points in this game are not completely shielded off from enemies. This is something you occasionally see in horror games that you don't see anywhere else. Decades of playing many different types of games have trained me to think that save locations are actually safe. I've learned through repeated exposure that I don't have to worry about being attacked while trying to save or even while accessing an in-game store or merchant. Well, Dead Space takes that preconceived notion and brutally dismembers it. Many save locations are in rooms with enemies, so you can be attacked as you approach the save station, after saving, or even while using the in-game store. It adds to the suspense and requires you to make sure that you're truly safe before letting your guard down. Environmental puzzles and zero-G sections also returned from Dead Space 1. The zero-G sections are where I specifically, as a sci-fi stan, love to just sit and admire. I love the space setting, and this game did a great job at combining a visually stunning sci-fi landscape with a tense and terrifying game experience. Dead Space 2 also had a pretty solid multiplayer mode before the servers went down. You got to play as either a human or different types of necromorphs. I played it a few times with friends and remember enjoying it. This online-only feature has long been discontinued, but thankfully there's no trophies tied to it. If survival horror is something you crave, Dead Space 2 has everything you need. This is a fantastic and, dare I say, underrated sequel. The game has some challenging difficulty modes, a respectable variety of weapons and suits, and a New Game Plus mode that adds replayability. As with many difficult platinum trophies, Dead Space 2 is infamous for one specific trophy: Hard to the Core. This trophy requires you to beat the game on hardcore difficulty, which is unlocked after beating the game the first time. Hardcore difficulty sets enemy encounters to the second highest difficulty and item drops to the highest difficulty. Enemies will be harder to kill, you'll die easier, and ammo will be a lot more scarce. Most notably, hardcore mode limits your entire run to 3 saves. If you die, the game will take you back to your last save, and after your third save, you can no longer save the game. Dead Space 2 consists of 15 chapters and takes around 10 hours to beat. This means you'll need to be strategic with your 3 saves to minimize potential lost time, prioritizing them around difficult sections and making sure they're not used too early or bunched up too close together. This also means that dying before you reach your next save could set you back a good 2 to 3 hours, so the stakes for failure are quite high. Thankfully, this isn't a full-blown permadeath mode. I'd be in real trouble if it was, but this is still a big challenge. I won't go into detail on specific hard parts of the game, since the primary difficulty of this hardcore run really just boils down to resource conservation and knowing exactly what enemies spawn and where, so I'll just give some general tips. First, you're going to want to be very cheap with your credits, especially early on. I tried to avoid buying medkits and even ammo unless I was dangerously low. Even though you're playing on a difficulty that's characterized by low item drop rates, you still get a lot of ammo in Dead Space 2, provided you're not carelessly wasting it. Ideally, you don't want to waste credits buying ammo, so you can use them later on for suits, weapons, or upgrades. Using necromorph limbs and exploding canisters with the telekinesis ability is a great way to save on ammo, especially early on, and it's a key strategy that makes this run a lot easier. You don't want to spend a bunch of credits on ammo, but obviously, if you need to, do it sparingly. The contact beam is a very powerful weapon when upgraded, and its alternate fire can carry you through all the hardest parts of the late game. I highly recommend you use the plasma cutter as much as possible and fully upgrade it as soon as you can. Its ammo is very common and cheap to buy, and it's very easy to use. I did most of the game with a fully upgraded plasma cutter and eventually got the upgraded contact beam as I got closer to the end. The contact beam's alternate fire can get you out of so many hairy situations. I found myself multiple times actually running into the middle of a room filled with enemies just to pull them up and fire it off, killing almost all of them with one shot. Like I mentioned, the ammo isn't cheap, so you can't just mindlessly spam this, but it is a very effective weapon. Limiting yourself to 1 or 2 weapons will minimize the ammo you get for other weapons, which helps keep your inventory from clogging up. Any ammo that you can't directly use, sell in the store for extra credits. Next, always keep at least 1 power node on you. There are many rooms that are locked behind power nodes, and pretty much every single one of them is worth using a power node for. These can contain very useful schematics such as suits, semiconductors, and even additional power nodes. Speaking of suits, the only ones I recommend getting after the first engineering suit are the security suit in Chapter 4, and then finally the advanced suit in Chapter 11. The advanced suit gives a 20% damage reduction and is very helpful for the final stretch of the game. Be sure to grab as many semiconductors as you can, since these can be sold for a large amount of credits, and also make sure you grab the Peng treasure in Chapter 7. Not only will this net you a trophy, but it can be sold for credits, and there's also some other very valuable items in that room. Like Dead Space 1, Dead Space 2 has a handful of boss fights that can prove to be challenging on a first playthrough, but they become easier if you manage your stasis and ammo properly. It helps to be able to aim, but most boss arenas in Dead Space 2 provide you with a very comfortable amount of ammo regardless. This first boss fight, about 30 minutes in, contains a stasis recharging station, and it kind of forces you to use stasis because this guy jumps around and flails his limbs a lot, so he's tough to take down without it. The game makes it clear at this point that stasis is an important tool in taking down hard and fast enemies. Stasis, like I said, will recharge on its own, even though it takes a few minutes. There were multiple instances where my stasis was empty, and I knew I had a tough part coming up, so I just stood there and waited a few minutes. As is the case with a lot of hard trophies, patience can go a long way. Enemy spawns are generally set in stone, so if you can learn each chapter like the back of your hand, you can know exactly what to expect in each section. Leapers are some of the toughest enemies in the game since they can climb walls and ceilings. They can also jump really far and fast, so they can close the distance between you and them very quickly. Stasis comes in handy for taking these guys out, and you'll want to kill them as quickly as possible. Likewise, the infector enemies can infect dead human bodies laying on the ground, so you want to take those out as soon as possible, or they'll start to make more necromorphs. There's a few sections that involve QuickTime events or other sequences that can cause instant failure if you don't know what you're doing. They're not hard, but they can be a frustrating way to fail a run if you're not prepared. Telekinesis is also incredibly useful, not just in launching things towards enemies, but pulling things towards you. See a clip of ammo next to a waiting necromorph? Grab it with telekinesis and pull it towards you instead of walking right into the trap. You can also use it to carry items that won't fit in your inventory. You'll have to manually hold the item to carry it, but if there's an expensive item you know you can sell, and you know there's a store in the next room, you can use telekinesis to bring it with you without using up an inventory slot. Using all of the tools at your disposal is critical in getting through this mode. I used my 3 saves at Chapter 5 right before the Tormentor fight, Chapter 9 after linking up with Strauss and Ellie, and Chapter 12 right before the drill ride. These were the parts that made me the most nervous, so this is what I went with, but you'll find different recommendations depending on where you look. I did have a few deaths between saves 1 and 2 that cost me a few hours each, but I managed to beat this mode with only 6 total deaths. Some of these deaths were my fault, and some were due to me just not understanding parts of the game, but they were all easily avoidable. In the end, your choice of the 3 save spots really depends on your personal preference and what you're comfortable with. All in all, I would give this Platinum Trophy an 8 out of 10 for difficulty. It's a demanding but fair challenge. It's certainly not impossible if you're willing to familiarize yourself with the game. In terms of time, I didn't track my playtime, but the trophy guide's estimate of 40 hours seems appropriate. It'll take roughly 3 playthroughs at around 10 hours each, and after factoring in time for deaths and miscellaneous trophies, 40 hours is probably pretty accurate. In addition to all the story and difficulty related trophies, Dead Space 2 has quite a few miscellaneous trophies. A lot of these are very simple and easy, like killing a certain number of enemies with each weapon. These can be earned at any time, but a trophy guide will point you to some easier spots to earn them. Some of the miscellaneous trophies, however, are chapter specific, so you'll have to either make a manual save right before trying them so you can revert back to it, or start a completely new run to get back to that point. The trophy elevator action, for example, is a particularly tricky one, and it requires you to knock off every tripod during the elevator sequence in Chapter 7. Make sure to make a manual save right before you try it because it's most likely going to take a few tries. But you really just got to be quick and accurate with your shots, and it shouldn't be too bad. Another trophy requires you to decompress 20 necromorphs using decompression windows. There's only 5 of these in the whole game, and you won't be able to do it in a single playthrough, but knowing where these are and maximizing the amount of kills you get in each one will help you get it faster. Just make sure you don't get sucked out yourself. There are trophies for fully upgrading your rig, which includes your health points and your telekinesis, as well as your stasis module. You'll also have to fully upgrade 4 weapons and have them equipped at one time. This will probably take more than one playthrough, but just stick to 4 weapons and pick up or buy all the power nodes that you can, and it's pretty easy. Make sure to pick up all the audio and text logs that you find, as you'll need 100 total for the librarian trophy. There's way more than 100 in the game, and I got this trophy way back in 2011 without much effort, so it's not as bad as it sounds. Most of the remaining trophies will probably be earned naturally, but as I mentioned, they're all pretty easy, especially if you check the trophy guide. I always recommend a review of a trophy guide, especially for a platinum as difficult as this one. Most of the list is pretty straightforward, but there are a handful of missable trophies that you'll want to be aware of. There's no chapter select after beating the game, so unless you know exactly where some of these are, you might fail to make a manual save before trying, and if you don't get it, you might have to replay the entire game again up to that point to try again. Beyond that, the only other thing you might find useful is a guide for hardcore mode. I tried to give all my best tips in the difficulty section, but there's multiple ways of going about this challenge. Like I mentioned earlier, there's multiple weapons in the game that can be very effective if used properly. There is no single best answer, and looking up what strategies other people have used and what weapons they prioritized is a great way to get ideas on how to improve your runs. I think I can safely put Dead Space 2 in my top 10 hardest platinum trophies. It's the first really hard horror game platinum I've ever earned, and it's one of the earliest examples of a hard platinum trophy that, at one time, I figured I'd never earn. For the longest time, I had this platinum trophy in the "it would be cool to have, but I'm not skilled enough or ballsy enough to try it" category. The stakes for failure are high, and you have to know the game inside and out. Having only 3 saves for a 10-hour campaign means you'll have to go long periods of time playing at a high level or risk losing hours of progress. There are multiple parts in this game where you have a lot of enemies coming at you with limited options for escape, so you have to be prepared at all times and not panic. This is an old, hard platinum from the PS3 era that I think has maintained most of its challenge even after all these years. With other notoriously hard PS3 platinums like Mirror's Edge and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, I felt those games were not as difficult in the modern age as they may have been originally, because so much time has passed, allowing for effective strategies and guides to emerge that made them easier. Dead Space 2, however, is still quite challenging due to the save limitation. Whether you went for this platinum in 2011 or 2026, losing multiple hours of progress hurts all the same. In addition to completing the base game trophy list, there are a few additional tasks that a completionist might be interested in. For starters, buying all the weapons and suits and fully upgrading them is rather easy, but quite time consuming and will take multiple playthroughs. In fact, there are some schematics that only drop in New Game Plus. Similarly, collecting every single log is probably not something you're going to do naturally, even after earning all the trophies. That said, you should easily be able to get all of them using a collectible guide. Dead Space 2 has one DLC expansion titled Severed with 8 additional trophies. This DLC is closely connected to another Dead Space game, Dead Space Extraction, which came out shortly after the first Dead Space. I haven't played Extraction, but the Severed DLC has you playing as a character from that game who is on the sprawl trying to find his wife. The gameplay is pretty much identical to the base game, and it's a fairly short DLC, but you'll have to complete it on Zealot difficulty for a trophy, as well as earn a few miscellaneous trophies along the way. After you complete hardcore mode in the base game of Dead Space 2, you'll get the famous foam finger weapon. This is one of the coolest weapons in video game history in my opinion, and of course I used it to make the Severed DLC a casual and fun experience with almost no challenge. It's a giant red foam finger, and it basically one-shots all enemies in the game. Isaac will even make the sound effects himself when firing it. It's such a cool, fun weapon to use after beating a hard difficulty as notorious as Dead Space 2's hardcore mode. If you've already gotten the Dead Space 2 Platinum, playing this DLC with the foam finger is a fun little victory lap. Dead Space 2 is a great and honestly overlooked sequel. I think it's just as good as the first game, and that is a high bar to meet. I also think the Platinum Trophy is a perfect challenge. This game is very predictable, and you can know exactly what to expect in every section of the game if you've been there before. There's almost no RNG involved, and I don't recall running into any bugs that had any impact on my experience. Hardcore mode is obviously challenging, but it's fair. You're not going to get screwed over by something outside of your control. Everything about this mode is doable, and there are multiple ways that you can succeed. You don't necessarily need to rely on one overpowered weapon or strategy, and you don't need to cheese any of it to make it possible. Beating hardcore mode boils down to a few simple things. Learn the game, know your weapons, stay calm, and execute. That's it. The rest of the trophies also don't require a ton of mindless grinding, and I had no issues with any of them unlocking properly. There are no online trophies, which means this platinum will forever be obtainable, so if you're looking for a game with a challenging platinum, a varied trophy list, and a great story filled with tension, Dead Space 2 is a solid choice. After finishing Dead Space 2, I took a bit of a break from hard games. I went through an unexpected job layoff at the start of the year and kind of fell into a mental funk. For the first couple months, I was lacking motivation to do anything productive, and that included playing hard games. Instead, I played some more casual games and earned a couple easier platinums. I also finished the Wolfenstein 2 DLCs, cleaned up some of my PS3 backlog, and finally got back into the swing of the hard platinums grind in early April with The Evil Within, a PS4 horror title from 2014. This game first popped up on my radar a couple years after release, around 2016-2017. I was living with a roommate at the time who knew I loved gaming, and one day he just randomly gave me this game from his collection. I had never heard of it, and while I was grateful, I really had zero intention of playing it. Sorry, Jordan, because horror games were never really one of my favorite genres. However, in preparation for this series, I kept seeing The Evil Within mentioned whenever I was researching hard platinum trophies, so I felt obligated to put it on the list, and I'm actually glad I did. The Evil Within was directed by Shinji Mikami. If that name sounds unfamiliar to you, he created a little game called Resident Evil. Ever heard of it? Resident Evil is an almost 30-year-old series at this point, a household name with dozens of games, numerous films, and countless other forms of media. But in the mid to late 90s, it helped popularize the entire survival horror genre. I'm by no means a Resident Evil expert. I did play the original Resident Evil 2 a bit on N64 as a kid, along with the original releases of Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, but it's been many years since I played one. And yet, I could still see the obvious parallels between Resident Evil and The Evil Within. Right off the bat, the first encounter you have with the Haunted, which is what the evil beings are called in this game, is almost a frame-for-frame recreation of the first zombie encounter from the original Resident Evil. The Evil Within doesn't shy away from its roots, and it has many other enemies, scenarios, and gameplay mechanics that are reminiscent of Resident Evil games. I went into The Evil Within not knowing anything about it, and it ended up being one of my most memorable horror gaming experiences ever. It stressed me out in both good ways and bad ways, and opened my eyes to what a horror game experience can be when played the right way. Besides being outright terrifying, The Evil Within is legendary among trophy hunters for one reason: a single trophy that requires you to complete the game on Akumu mode. Akumu is a Japanese term meaning, you done f***ed up now. Okay, in reality it just means nightmare, which is still fitting, but this mode has a single defining characteristic. Everything kills you in one hit. With an estimated difficulty of 9 out of 10, I knew I was in for a real treat, so I dove in head first. What followed was an experience chock full of countless deaths, high blood pressure, and a new appreciation for the horror genre. In The Evil Within, you play as Detective Sebastian Castellanos. After getting a call about an incident at a local mental hospital, you and your colleagues walk into a bloodbath of a scene. Dead bodies and pools of blood litter the reception area, and a lone survivor, Dr. Marcelo Jimenez, remains. Soon after, things get even more dire when you're introduced to the main villain, identified simply as Ruvik. Immediately, you can tell Ruvik is pissed about something. He suddenly appears behind you and renders you unconscious, and you wake up in the basement of the hospital, which looks like a scene straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Somehow, you manage to escape Leatherface, but as you leave the hospital, the world quickly starts to transform in horrifying ways. The earth opens up beneath you, swallowing buildings, vehicles, and anybody unlucky enough to be caught behind. Things go from bad to worse when people start morphing into diseased, evil beings called Haunted who all want to kill you. The early parts of the game have you trying to escape from terrifying scenarios while trying to find your partners, Joseph and Kidman, who are also in this messed up world somewhere. Each new area you explore is more terrifying than the last, and it doesn't take long before your surroundings make the initial sight at the mental hospital look sanitized and tame in comparison. For most of the game, brutal scenes of blood and gore exist in just about every room you enter, and those that don't will mess with your mind in other ways. You quickly learn that this world you're in is actually inside Ruvik's mind, or at least some bastardized version of it. Ruvik and Dr. Jimenez were brilliant scientists who worked together to create a revolutionary machine called STEM that allows individuals' minds to become linked together, and anybody who's connected to the machine afterwards gets brought into this world shaped by the host mind. With Ruvik as the original host, they eventually find a way to pull individuals into this system remotely without a physical connection, which is what brings Sebastian and his team into the picture at the start of the game. Ruvik's mind turns out to be a terrifying place, and each chapter in the game takes you deeper as you learn more about who Ruvik is, his backstory, and his motivations. He appears throughout the game to further the plot and also to personally stalk you through some of the levels. Eventually, you discover what is a common trope in video games, which is that the main villain is not the only evil one in this story. There's almost always an evil corporation behind every villain arc, and the evil within is no different. Dr. Jimenez has been working with Mobius, a corporation that wants to advance and, more importantly, control the STEM technology. Ruvik's intentions with the STEM technology, though originally pure, turn sadistic, and it's clear he needs to be stopped at all costs. On your path to stop Ruvik, you'll have to defeat some formidable bosses, solve some simple puzzles, and handle the endless tricks your mind, or more accurately Ruvik's mind, will play on you. Throughout the game, you're also trying to find and save Leslie, a young patient from the mental hospital. Leslie's role in the story is not initially clear, but it's revealed later on as you peel back the layers of this psychological horror mystery. The Evil Within is a very linear, story-focused game with a multitude of collectibles that provide greater context to the story. Newspaper articles, journals, audio logs, and other forms of media give additional details about the game's characters and plot. The first two DLCs for The Evil Within, The Assignment and The Consequence, both have you playing as Officer Kidman, and you learn a lot more about Mobius and STEM in those expansions. So I definitely recommend you play those after playing the base game if you want more context on the game's plot. This is a great utilization of downloadable content in my opinion. Sometimes a game's story leaves questions unanswered or plot holes unfilled and leaves some things open to the player's interpretation. This isn't inherently a bad thing, but optional downloadable content that fills in some of those gaps is a great way to satisfy the lore whores while giving them a way to support the developers of the game even further. The Evil Within is a masterclass in psychological survival horror. You'll quickly see the inspiration from the early Resident Evil games that focused on limited resources, puzzle solving, and a sense of calculated urgency, as well as those later games that started leaning towards action and gunplay like Resident Evil 4 and beyond. The Evil Within introduces enough new material to make it more than just a simple Resident Evil clone, and it's a captivating and terrifying experience that any horror game fan should play through at least once, but maybe on an easier difficulty, for sanity's sake. The Evil Within is played from a third-person, over-the-shoulder perspective, and the gameplay is defined by limited resources, dark, claustrophobic levels, and hyper-alert enemies. Typical of survival horror games, the ever-present feeling of dread that comes with knowing you can die at any time is multiplied by the psychological terror of never knowing what could happen next. This game plays with your mind in a way most Resident Evil games never did. You're fighting a lot more than just slow chasing zombies. You're constantly dealing with visual and audible hallucinations, grotesque supernatural monsters, and an unraveling story and world that feels more and more hopeless as it progresses. Sebastian has access to all the common firearms you'd expect to see in a survival horror action game: a pistol, shotgun, sniper rifle, grenades, and Molotovs, as well as the most unique and effective weapon in the game, the Agony Crossbow. The Agony Crossbow allows you to use spare parts found throughout the game to craft and use 5 different bolt types. You have standard harpoons, shock bolts, freeze bolts, flash bolts, and explosive bolts. Each of these bolt types serves a different purpose. Simple harpoon bolts are good for high damage and for knocking back sturdy enemies. Crowd control focused bolts like the flash, shock, and freeze bolts can be a lifesaver when you're in a panic surrounded by enemies. All of these weapons can be improved through a deep upgrading system, allowing you to upgrade firepower, clip size, and reload speed, as well as the effects of the agony bolts, such as how long a flash bolt will incapacitate enemies. Completing the game on higher difficulties and collecting map fragments will give you access to additional special weapons like brass knuckles, a machine gun, and a rocket launcher that add more variety and give you a reason to keep playing the game beyond a first playthrough. Sebastian can also opt for utility-focused upgrades like sprint duration, max health, and match capacity, and these are equally important in improving your chances of success. Unfortunately, some of the gunplay in this game was wonky as hell. There were so many times where my gun's crosshair was completely filled in by an enemy body part. I'd fire multiple shots and miss every one. Due to the resource scarcity embedded in the game, this would often force a checkpoint restart on higher difficulties. I also had a handful of instances where I'd try to melee a standing enemy in front of me, only for Sebastian to inexcusably stomp an enemy on the ground below me instead, often causing me to take damage or die. I don't have a lot of complaints about the Evil Within's combat, but these were some notable examples of frustrating deficiencies. Saving in the Evil Within is done in safe havens. Interacting with mirrors found in the game will transport you to a hospital location where you can save the game and buy upgrades. You're safe from enemies in these safe havens, but that doesn't mean it's completely free of jump scares and moments of tension. It's also dynamic. The safe haven changes as the game progresses and also gives you more background on the game's plot. The nurse who inhabits the safe haven also knows when you're spamming saves to maintain progress, which is something I did a lot of. It's a nice touch from the devs who recognize that players would be utilizing this exploit. Collectible keys can be found throughout the game which open up lockers in the safe haven. These lockers can contain ammo or upgrade points and are also very important in improving your chances on Akumu mode, so it's definitely worthwhile to spend the time and grab as many as you can. There's also a trophy for opening all the lockers, so you'll have to do this anyway for the platinum. Most areas in the game are riddled with traps which can be disarmed, but some are also incredibly tough to spot unless you know where they are. Getting stuck in a trap will alert enemies and can take out a huge chunk of your health, which forces you to transition from careful, silent sneaking to sheer panic and sprinting in the opposite direction and hoping a whole wave of enemies doesn't chase you, because you know you don't have enough ammo to take them all down. Disarming traps will give you spare parts that can be used to craft agony bolts. This is especially useful on higher difficulties where you'll be relying on the agony crossbow a lot. However, traps are much harder to disarm on the higher difficulties. This can be easily exploited by disarming a couple traps, returning to a safe haven and saving your game, and then going back to disarm some more. That way, if you fail and die, which you probably will, you'll reload without losing much progress. Most areas have haunted bodies on the floor, which will not pose a threat to you until you make too much noise or alert other enemies. If that happens, these enemies will add to the chasing mob. The game gives you a way to deal with these if you choose. The player can use matches to set bodies on fire. This will permanently kill the enemy, and if you manage to get multiple bodies piled up on top of one another, you can light them all on fire at once, including enemies that are standing nearby. This is the Evil Within's remedy for scarce ammo on the harder difficulties. Matches are not easy to come by, but they can be just as powerful as multiple magazines of ammo when used correctly. The Evil Within has some pretty intimidating boss fights, some of which chase you down and insta-kill you if they catch you. In some of these fights, the focus isn't on killing the boss, but running away while trying to quickly activate switches or moving from objective A to objective B before the boss catches you. This can get incredibly tense, knowing death is just a few seconds behind you while you're fumbling around trying to shoot a switch or pull a lever. Stealth is a very important part of success in the Evil Within. You can sneak behind most non-boss enemies and perform a stealth kill, which is absolutely crucial in some parts, because you just can't afford to have a bunch of enemies spot and chase you. There's typically not enough ammo to kill all the enemies with gunfire, especially on Akumu mode. You can pick up and throw bottles to distract and position enemies for easier stealth kills, or as a means to sneak by them. Akumu mode will force you to learn enemy patrol routes, as well as where you might need to lure them in order to sneak by. Unfortunately, the Evil Within does not have a cover mechanic. This can lead to some very frustrating instances where you're hiding around a corner waiting for a good opportunity to pop out, but being unable to see or having trouble facing the right direction. In addition to the wonky combat quirks I mentioned earlier, the lack of a cover mechanic is probably the only other major complaint I have with the Evil Within's gameplay. A cover button was added in the first two DLCs, but it would have greatly improved the stealth and combat of the base game if the devs had the foresight to add it from the start. I did my first playthrough on survival difficulty while avoiding all upgrades as the trophy guide recommends for efficiency's sake, and this made for an unforgettable experience. I have never played a horror game for the first time on a high difficulty level. Usually if I'm playing a game like Resident Evil, I play through it on easy, maybe even in co-op if we're talking about a game like Resident Evil 5 or 6, and then after I'm through the game once or twice, I'll play it on a higher difficulty, but usually only after I have a ton of better weapons and upgrades like infinite ammo. It's a completely different experience to play a horror game for the first time on a high difficulty. When you don't know what to expect and your resources are low the entire time, it adds a tremendous amount of dread and anxiety to the playthrough. I also played it with the lights off and while wearing headphones, which further added to the tension. As much as I wish I could say Akumu mode was the only hard part about this platinum trophy, this game was tough from the very first no upgrade playthrough on survival mode. I was trying to avoid detection at all times and was treating every enemy as an automatic death if spotted due to the lack of ammo and skill. In some ways, this first playthrough actually felt harder than the Akumu run. Difficulty comes in many different forms, and there's something to be said about the difficulty of not knowing what's coming up next in a psychological horror survival game where you only have a handful of bullets, a sliver of health, and the weakest versions of every weapon. Sure, maybe I could survive a hit or two from an enemy on this difficulty, but I definitely couldn't survive being chased by 5 enemies when I have almost no ammo, little health, and very short sprint duration. Learning the game for the first time on a high difficulty is a challenge, and I try not to use guides on my first playthrough of any game, so trying to figure out how to get past hordes of enemies in the safest way possible presented me with many roadblocks on this first playthrough. The lack of upgrades made boss encounters much tougher, but thankfully, most of the bosses that you actually need to kill are in large arena-style areas, so you at least have some space to maneuver and objects to hide behind, at least temporarily. I also didn't collect any keys or open any lockers on this first playthrough, which in hindsight was very stupid and probably made things harder for me than necessary, but as I played through the game the first time, I found myself trying to get through each area as efficiently as possible. If I got through an encounter with 5 enemies by firing 3 bullets, I'd ask myself, can I get through it firing only 2 bullets, or 1, or none? Can I just sprint past all the enemies, or use a trap in the environment instead? So I'd reload the checkpoint and try it out. Resource conservation is perhaps the most important part of a successful high difficulty run in The Evil Within, and getting the most out of your ammo is incredibly important. I knew this familiarity would eventually pay off with the Akumu mode run. Once I finished my survival no upgrades run, I opted to go directly into Akumu mode. As I mentioned in the beginning, Akumu mode is where everything kills you in one hit, so it's definitely intimidating and it's the reason this platinum trophy is notoriously difficult. The guide suggests doing Akumu mode after doing the speed run and getting all the miscellaneous trophies, and although it would have been nice to pop the platinum immediately after Akumu mode, I wanted to get the most stressful part of the platinum out of the way while my skill level was at its peak. There are a few crucial steps to take in order to make Akumu mode easier to deal with. Besides the obvious one of familiarizing yourself with each area, puzzle, and boss, managing upgrades correctly is also vital. Upgrade points are limited, and if you don't prioritize the right upgrades before reaching key encounters late in the game, you'll be in for a very tough time. Certain upgrades such as sprint and flash bolt duration, as well as match and ammo capacity, are incredibly important in making Akumu mode a lot more manageable. Like I mentioned before, you'll want to collect as many keys as possible on your Akumu playthrough to provide you with as much ammo and upgrade points as possible, because you'll need all the help you can get. Thankfully, most of the keys are easy to get and don't involve much additional risk. There are 2 notable exceptions. One key in Chapter 2 where there are just a ton of enemies and you're still underpowered, so it's a really tough key to grab. I just skipped it. And there's another key in Chapter 10 that requires you to kill the boss. This boss is not intended to be killed, and it's quite difficult to do so without the rocket launcher, which is impossible to get on Akumu mode. There is a glitch that allows you to easily kill this boss, but since I'm not utilizing glitches for the games I cover in this series, I just skipped this key. For some reason, the game gives you 2 more keys than you actually need, provided you get the 2 keys from one of the lockers. So you can actually skip these 2 keys in the story and still open all the lockers. Early in the playthrough, I realized I missed a key at the end of Chapter 3, right as I was starting Chapter 4. So I restarted my save in order to grab it before progressing because I just knew how important it was going to be Another important note on the keys is that the contents of each locker are randomized, so you can save the game before opening one, and that way if you get something you don't need, you can reload the save and open it again for a chance to get something better. There is a set number of each kind of locker reward. For example, there's an exact number of lockers that give upgrade gel, and an exact number that give magnum ammo, and so on and so forth. But the order of them is only partially determined, so you can roll the dice and try again if you don't get something that's preferable for your current situation. With all these things taken into consideration, the Akumu run is not a quick one. It took me over 15 hours of playtime to clear it, and there are quite a few challenging sections. I'll now go through some parts of the game that are known to be tough, as well as some that were just tough for me personally. Chapter 2 took me quite a while to get through because I had just one single bullet for the entire chapter after taking out the very first enemy. As a result, I had to sprint past the few early enemies and sneak past the rest as best as I could, luring them into traps and taking out the ones I could with stealth takedowns. Enemies are incredibly alert on Akumu mode. They can see you from 10 miles away even while crouching, so it's easy to get spotted accidentally, and then all you can do is try and run away and hopefully hide from them. Thankfully, with enough practice and refining of my strategy, I was able to give him the old razzle-dazzle and get through the chapter. Chapter 3 would normally be a very tough part of the game on an Akumu run, but I learned that you can despawn all the enemies, including the annoying Ruvik clone that only shows up on Akumu mode, by killing the Sadist boss immediately. With a little bit of preparation, you can grab a few weapons, plop them down next to the Sadist, initiate the fight, and quickly kill him, instantly despawning all the other enemies. This lets you loot all the enemies and containers in the area and disarm all the traps with virtually zero risk, and while using barely any ammo. This area also has 4 keys, so beating this chapter in such a way really sets you up well for the next few chapters. Chapter 5 introduces you to your first babysitting gig of the game, where you have to take out a bunch of enemies without letting your partner, Joseph, get killed. While he doesn't die in one hit like you do, he is pretty fragile, so you'll have to keep an eye on him because he does die rather easily. Thankfully, he's not completely useless. He will shoot and kill some enemies for you, and I was able to manage this section by bunching up enemies and using either the agony crossbow or shotgun blasts to the feet to finish off as many enemies as I could with matches. The ammo and upgrades I accumulated from the previous few chapters really helped make this not as painful as I feared. This was a long chapter though, taking me almost 2 hours to clear on Akumu. Now to chapter 6. Finally, sunlight. I've never been so happy to see the sun in a video game. I don't care how hard this chapter is, at least I won't be constantly stressed out trying to sneak around in the dark trying to stay alive. I can handle any level of difficulty if it means I can be in an open, brightly lit area and not have to worry about jump scares.
Shit.
You know what? Put me back in the dark. Chapter 6 is one of the hardest chapters of the game, and it also took me about 2.5 hours to clear on Akumu mode. Near the start of the chapter, you have easily one of the most annoying parts of the entire game, the burning house. You start off in this very small room in a burning house, waiting for Joseph to unlock the next door while enemies slowly pour in. The secret here is to just avoid the enemies while Joseph unlocks the door. That's easier said than done. They'll rush at you and throw things at you, and eventually there will just be so many of them that they cover most of the room, so it gets hard trying to run around all of them. This is where the flash bolts really earn their place as one of the best weapons in the game. One flash bolt to the ground will stun enemies in a sizable radius for a significant amount of time. Since you don't need to actually kill any enemies here, The flash bolts are clutch for buying you enough time to make it downstairs to the next section. Once you get through the first door, you go into the basement. There's no checkpoint here, so if you die down here, you have to redo the upstairs section again, which is really annoying, but it's more of the same down here. Avoid all the enemies, flashing or stunning them when necessary until Joseph unlocks the door. Sprint through and get your checkpoint. A very important component of the preparation for an Akumu run is making sure you always have spare parts, just in case you need agony bolts, but you also can't waste them haphazardly. You only want to use as many as you need to, because there's a finite amount of them and you'll need to use a lot more later on. But feel free to use what you need to get through this notoriously frustrating section. Now for a painful realization, which is that the next section is much harder than the burning house bit. You enter this giant area, and once you progress past a certain point, you'll get a checkpoint and you'll have to deal with 4 enemy machine gunners. These gunners fire a volley of spears at a specific spot when you approach them, and they're also shielded between each attack. You have just a short window of time where the gunners are vulnerable. You have to kill all 4 gunners without being struck by the spears, while also avoiding infinitely spawning enemies, some of which have dynamite or crossbows of their own, and while also preventing Joseph from getting killed. This is easily one of the hardest bits in the entire game, and this section alone took me about an hour. I eventually found a way to kill all 4 gunners very quickly upon starting the checkpoint, and then safely taking out the remaining enemies while protecting Joseph in order to proceed to the next checkpoint. Chapter 6 ends with the first real difficult boss fight, a giant mutated dog that constantly charges at you, which is really hard to avoid. You can stun or freeze the boss with agony bolts, or blast it in the face with a shotgun to stun it, but this is easier said than done. This area is also covered with bear traps that will kill you if you step on them, so you don't have a lot of space to maneuver. I prioritized shotgun upgrades a lot during my Akumu mode playthrough, upgrading what I could to at least level 4, and it's really useful in this boss fight, for example. It's a great weapon for knocking back bosses and other tanky enemies, and it doesn't require good accuracy. It's also great for crowd control, especially for knocking multiple enemies to the ground who can then be set on fire. Shotgun ammo is also pretty common, so as long as you're not wasting it, you should have enough for when you need it. The next chapter I'll cover briefly is Chapter 9. Chapter 9 isn't especially difficult, but I did utilize a speedrun guide on Akumu mode just to get through it as quickly as possible. In this chapter, Ruvik will appear every few minutes and follow you for about 20 seconds, and he'll kill you if he touches you. He tends to pop up out of nowhere, sometimes directly in front of you, and honestly this just made me really anxious. I wanted to get the chapter done as quickly as possible, especially on Akumu mode. There's a guy on YouTube, Jigsaw Killer, who's an absolute beast at this game. He's done no death Akumu runs. He has some really good strategies for getting through levels quickly, so I started to reference those in this chapter. I definitely recommend checking out his videos if you're struggling with any particular section on Akumu mode. Chapter 10 is another one that's pretty long and can be challenging. The start of the chapter has you trying to navigate around deadly traps and fighting against some enemies with guns. Yes, guns. These guys basically have auto aim, so if you're out in the open and one of them sees you, it's almost a guarantee you'll die. Later in the chapter, you'll fight some very tanky mini-bosses called traumas. These guys are slow moving but can charge at you, and they are certified bullet sponges. At some point, you'll have to face 2 at once in a relatively tiny room about halfway through the chapter. It's up to you if you want to use the ammo necessary to kill them, or find a way to freeze or stun them, pull the lever quickly, and sprint past them. About 2/3 of the way through the chapter, you'll have the Laura boss fight. This is the one where you're not actually intended to kill her, you're just meant to run away. This proved to be a real challenge for me on Akumu. She seemed a lot quicker and a lot more aggressive on Akumu compared to the other modes, and she kept catching me while I was trying to open up the next area. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a glitch that allows you to kill her without much trouble. I didn't use it, but it's easy to find on YouTube if you want to take the easier way out. After escaping Laura, you'll fight the true end boss of Chapter 6, the Amalgam Alpha. This hulking behemoth can be a real bastard, but it's quite simple if you've put some upgrade points into your powerful weapons like the explosive bolts and the shotgun. At the start of the fight, blast the eyeball tentacle and the boss will be stunned for a few seconds. Pump it full of lead or explosives, and eventually it'll go into phase 2, which isn't much different, but once it hits phase 2, you need to shoot the eyeball at its center before finally finishing it off. There's a small room on both ends of this arena that you can go into for a few minutes of safety and find some ammo. Just make sure you get out of it after the boss reaches in, or the room will be destroyed, killing you with it.
Chapter 11 is probably the second hardest chapter of the game and another long one. There are lots of enemies with guns and there are a few sections that are really tough to get through. Very importantly, make sure you get the Magnum at the start of the chapter. I realized I missed it early on, so I restarted the chapter. You definitely want the Magnum as it will trivialize some of the otherwise tough encounters later on. Collect all the ammo you can for it and don't waste it on normal enemies. I relied heavily on flash bolts in this chapter. There are a few parts where lots of enemies are coming towards you and it's a lot easier to just stun them all with a flash bolt and finish them off with stealth kills than it is to try and shoot them all while avoiding their gunfire. The sniper rifle is also very useful in killing armed enemies from a distance in this chapter. About 1/3 of the way through the chapter, you'll come to this very annoying construction area. This area has lots of enemies with guns, crossbows, and dynamite, so you can't stay out in the open for too long. There's also an annoying sniper that pops up about halfway. The key here is to stay behind cover and using explosives like grenades or explosive bolts to kill multiple enemies at once, and doing that repeatedly until all the enemies are dead. This will take some practice, but this is where stocking up on spare parts really comes in handy, because the Agony crossbow can really help out with some of these challenging sections. Shortly after this section, you'll come to another annoying bit where you have to ride this gondola across a gap while enemies funnel in from both sides and from above. Not only will they shoot at you, but they'll throw axes and molotovs at you, so you can't just sit and hide. You're basically a sitting duck here, so you have to be quick and take out the enemies as they spawn in. Memorizing which order enemies spawn in is key here, and lucky for us, most of these enemies will fall off the ledge with just a single bullet. You can also utilize the explosive barrels here, and flash bolts or stun bolts can come in handy as a means to stun enemies, giving you enough time to finish the ride to the end. Near the end of the chapter, you have this very annoying section where you can't fire any bullets because you're in a building filled with explosive gas. These stupid death Roombas make it hard to navigate the first part of the section, and the second section requires you to find a key for the elevator. If you get spotted in the second section, one of the dynamite enemies will jihad himself and blow up the entire building. I discovered the easiest way for me was to lure both dynamite enemies to this spot with a bottle, stun them both with a flash bolt, and then stealth kill them. After getting the key, but before opening the door, make sure you're prepared for the group of enemies that will spawn right in your face. I think this group only spawns on Akumu mode, and I was completely unprepared for it the first time, so they killed me and I had to redo it. It's easy to get past them with a single flash bolt, but it's also easy to get caught off guard and die if you're not ready. Chapter 12 can be challenging if you don't know what to do. The boss fight is not too difficult provided you have enough ammo, but eventually you have to come through this section and reach an ambulance at the end of a road. There are lots of enemies with guns here, so make sure you lure them towards flammable barrels and traps to save your ammo. There's also a sniper at the very end, so you'll have to stay out of the open until you take him out. After reaching the ambulance, you'll have to go back to where you came from, back to the bus, but an armored truck with a machine gunner shows up to make this trek back a real pain in the ass. The key is to sprint between cover, making sure you're running at an angle, and then when the gunner jumps off, take him out quickly. The large group of enemies here will swarm you, so I used a few agony bolts just to make it easier. Jump on the turret gun, quickly mow down the next few waves of enemies, and then head towards the bus. I'm not sure if you need to kill any of these guys here at the end, but this is another example where having plenty of spare parts for bolts can make it much easier to handle large groups of enemies. Chapter 13 is mostly stealth focused, but this is another chapter where I looked up a speedrun guide to get through some parts quickly. Optanoob on YouTube has some really good videos for Akumu mode, and his method of getting through this section quickly saved me a lot of time and headaches. The rest of the chapter is fairly easy. For the final set of bosses in the meat freezer, I just whipped out my Magnum since one shot to the torso is enough to kill each keeper. I found that preferable to burning through shotgun or agony bolt ammo and failing over and over and trying something else. As long as you pick up all the Magnum ammo you can and don't foolishly waste it, you can afford to use a few rounds in this fight. Chapter 14 has a few annoying bits. This first part early on has enemies with guns, invisible enemies, and a Ruvik clone. Even with fully stocked ammo, it's really tough to get through this part without taking any damage. There's just a ton of enemies here. I got through the hard bit finally, after multiple failures, and then I foolishly died to a single easy enemy. I felt like an absolute noob, so fittingly, I went back to Optanoob's video guide, and he actually has a very simple and easy way of getting through this section. This is where I actually learned for the first time that you can take out a Ruvik clone with a single freeze bolt. Very handy information. I never would have known this if I didn't watch those videos, so don't feel guilty about relying on some help. It can save you tons of time, ammo, and most importantly, stress. Now approaching the end of the level, I used a few more magnum shots to get through this section with the 3 traumas with minimal difficulty before eventually proceeding to the final boss. Remember when I said the magnum can make later sections a lot easier? Well, the end boss of chapter 14 is the first and perhaps best example. Make sure you upgrade its damage to at least level 4, hit the boss with a shock bolt, and 4 to 5 magnum shots can take down this otherwise tricky boss in a matter of seconds. Now on to the final chapter of the game, chapter 15. There are 2 sections in this chapter really that can be intimidating, but if you've stocked up on spare parts, ammo, especially magnum rounds, they're both actually quite easy. In the giant room with all the eyes, you'll have a group of enemies spawn to the right and then another to the left. These are real easy to bunch up, hit them with a flash bolt, and then stealth kill them. After the first 2 waves, a third wave that includes a Ruvik clone will spawn in the dead center of the arena. If you can fire a preemptive shock bolt right where they spawn, they'll instantly get shocked and you can set them on fire right away. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. After that, you'll get a checkpoint. The 4th wave is a similar story. I like to tuck back here in the corner and funnel them towards me, and it's pretty simple if you have enough flash bolts. Eventually, a sadist with an RPG will spawn on the far end. I simply pumped a few magnum shots into his chest, and he dies before he even has time to whip out the chainsaw. Just make sure you save at least 6 magnum rounds for the final hard boss encounter of the game. The very last part of chapter 15 that could pose a problem is the aforementioned boss fight against 2 keepers. This part kicked my ass on my initial survival run, but that was because I had almost no spare parts and no magnum bullets. These guys are bullet sponges, and they also set traps around the area, so you really want to take them out as soon as possible. This is where the trusty magnum with upgraded damage makes a very challenging fight, frankly a joke. 3 magnum shots to each keeper's torso, and this whole fight can be over in 10 seconds. The rest of the chapter is relatively simple, and the final boss fight is more of a gimmick than a real challenge. Once you finish that, you'll get your end game screen that shows your playtime, number of deaths, and most importantly, the illustrious Akumu mode trophy. Overall, Akumu mode is quite difficult, but very manageable if you collect all the keys, prioritize the correct upgrades, conserve ammo, and consider utilizing strategy guides in situations where you might be stuck. The difficulty of the one-hit death nature of Akumu mode is balanced out by the very generous checkpoint system. You rarely ever lose more than 10 minutes of progress with a death, so even though you'll die a lot, the stakes for failure are rather low. You can fail over and over for an hour straight, incrementally improving on each attempt until you can make it to the next checkpoint. For this reason, I think this infamously difficult platinum is very achievable for those with a little bit of perseverance. So what score would I give this platinum's difficulty? I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, probably a low 8, like an 8.1, 8.2. If this was a permadeath mode, I think it would be impossible for me, but the very generous checkpoints and plethora of guides available online make this platinum trophy very doable. I would say it's just slightly harder than Dead Space 2. They have similar skill requirements, but more than anything, it's just a lot more annoying than Dead Space 2 with all the deaths and retries you'll experience. This platinum trophy took me 46 hours, which is very close to what the guide says. And then I spent another 16 hours or so to 100% all the DLC trophies. The platinum requires at least 3 playthroughs, and I did about 2/3 of a 4th playthrough to grab all the collectibles, but you can optimize this a little better than I did if you don't mind using a collectible guide on your first playthrough. In addition to completing Akumu mode and earning all the difficulty-specific trophies, you'll also have to do a fresh playthrough without buying any upgrades for the It Is What It Is trophy. This can be done on any difficulty, but the guide and I both recommend doing this on your first survival playthrough. This makes that first playthrough very challenging, but it goes a long way in preparing you for Akumu mode. So in my opinion, it's worth the struggle. You'll also have to do a speed run of the whole game, clearing it in less than 5 hours, for the quick and the dead. This is pretty easy if you do it on New Game Plus and ignore all optional enemies and collectibles. Contrary to the recommendation of the trophy guide, I did this after my Akumu run, so I had access to the brass knuckles, which will one-shot most enemies with a single punch if you put a couple upgrade points into melee damage. There are 106 collectibles to grab for trophies, along with at least 45 keys you'll need to collect in order to open all the lockers for the Master of Unlocking trophy. Collectibles can be cleaned up using chapter select select New Game Plus, which is what I did to avoid having to follow a guide on my first playthrough. A lot of these are pretty easy to find, so I was able to get most of them on my first playthrough without using a guide. You'll have to purchase all weapon, utility, and ammo upgrades for a handful of trophies, which will require a lot of green gel, but there's a simple way of doing this that can greatly reduce the amount of farming you'll have to do post-game. If you do your first playthrough with no upgrades, you'll end the run with quite a lot of gel. If you manage to collect all the keys on this first playthrough, wait to open the last locker in the safe haven until New Game Plus. In New Game Plus, all green gel is doubled, and the last locker will give you a whopping 200,000 gel. After opening the final locker, but before spending any gel, save your game. After saving, buy all the utility upgrades to unlock the hard body trophy. Then, reload your save and buy all the weapon upgrades for those 3 trophies. Reload your save one more time, and buy all the ammo upgrades to earn Why Can't I Hold All This Ammo. This will allow you to get all the upgrade trophies without having to have all the green gel on you at one time. There are quite a few miscellaneous trophies to earn, some of which are chapter specific and others that are cumulative across multiple chapters and playthroughs. After clearing the game once, Chapter Select will help you mop these up without much trouble. If you can clear the game on Akumu mode, these will be a piece of cake, so just check the trophy guide for easy spots to get these done. Guides will be useful for this Platinum Trophy in multiple respects. A trophy guide, of course, will give you an efficient path to the Platinum Trophy, and it'll also give you general tips for hard trophies like Akumu mode. Once again, I always recommend reviewing a trophy guide if you're struggling with a specific trophy, and the guide on PSN Profiles is pretty good for this game. Following a collectible guide that covers all collectibles in one video or one text walkthrough is also a very efficient and convenient way of grabbing all those, so I recommend that as well. Some of the collectibles, especially a few of the keys, would be quite hard to find without some help. Lastly, I recommend utilizing video strategy guides in parts where you might be stuck in Akumu mode or even on your first survival mode run if you're not opposed to it. Whether it's a boss fight or a tricky section you're trying to get through using stealth, getting tips and ideas from other players can be a massive help. Like I mentioned before, I referenced some speedrun videos in order to get through certain parts of Akumu mode quickly and without wasting too much ammo, since burning through ammo early in the game can come back to bite you later on. I can sympathize with the purists who want to figure out everything on their own, but I'm certainly not averse to using a guide to make things easier for myself. This game is almost 12 years old now, and there are people who have put thousands of hours into this game. Just like with Mein Leben, there's no shame in utilizing the expertise of the community when you hit a roadblock. As I get through more and more of these hard Platinum trophies, it will be more and more difficult to decide if a game makes it into my top 10 hardest Platinums. I probably need to do an updated top 10 list soon, but for now, I think The Evil Within would crack the top 10, somewhere in the bottom half. I expect it will be surpassed by some of the other games later on, but for now I think I can safely put it in my top 10 hardest Platinum trophies. Completing the trophy list of the base game will require you to beat the hardest difficulty and grab every collectible, and it coincides perfectly with the 100% game completion, which is great news for die-hard completionists who might care about more than just the trophies. There are, however, 3 DLCs that add 10 new trophies each. I touched on the first 2 DLCs, The Assignment and The Consequence, very briefly in the story section. These are actually pretty solid DLCs that expand on the story of the base game. They delve deeper into why Mobius wants to control the STEM technology, and they focus on Kidman's role behind the scenes of The Evil Within's main story. These 2 DLCs introduce a couple new enemies and mechanics, and in terms of trophies, you'll have to beat each one twice and snag some miscellaneous trophies along the way. They each only take a couple hours to finish, so this isn't too bad. After you beat each one, you'll unlock Kuriyami mode, which you'll also have to beat for a trophy. Kuriyami mode is a new mode where you have absolutely no light except for your flashlight and, in the second DLC, your glow sticks. This was actually a really cool, albeit frightening experience. These DLCs are mostly focused on stealth, and navigating through them in pitch blackness except for the light that you hold in your hands added a new level of stress and excitement to these runs. Each DLC has a handful of collectibles to grab, and there are some good walkthroughs available online that can help you get through each one quickly and safely while grabbing the collectibles on the way. These first 2 DLCs have 2 additional types of collectibles, player models and music tracks, that don't have trophies associated with them, so you probably won't get them just by following a trophy guide. There are some collectible guides online that can help you find them if you truly want to collect absolutely everything, but some of these are missable, so I just let most of them go. The third DLC switches things up and lets you play as a keeper mini-boss in first person. This one is more action heavy and doesn't contain any stealth. You'll fight some bosses from the base game, including Joseph and Sebastian. This one also has a handful of collectibles and miscellaneous trophies, which are for the most part pretty easy to find. There are 2 notable trophies in this DLC. The first requires you to complete 18 torments. Torments are basically miscellaneous challenges, most of which you'll probably get naturally. There is one torment, however, Torment 18, that is possibly the hardest DLC trophy in the game. You have to defeat multiple waves of enemies, including bosses, and the final wave has you facing Sebastian and Joseph at the same time. They deal really high damage, so you'll need to be adequately upgraded and strategize this a little bit, but it's not too bad. The second notable trophy in this DLC is to clear the entire DLC without taking damage. This is actually fairly easy when you do it on New Game Plus after you've purchased all the upgrades. Upgrades will make your weapons more powerful and help you move quicker. If you wait until you've completed all the torments, you'll unlock infinite ammo to purchase in the upgrade shop. So you can just speed through the DLC with an infinite ammo rocket launcher and restart checkpoint if you happen to take damage. All in all, the 100% won't require an unreasonable amount of extra time or effort beyond the Platinum Trophy. I am pleasantly surprised at just how much I enjoyed this game on my first playthrough, even considering the intense struggles I faced. Figuring the game out on my own and taking in the full horror experience by avoiding guides and playing on a high difficulty with headphones and the lights off really added to the immersion and made for an experience I won't forget anytime soon. As I've said, I've never been a huge horror game fan, but this game opened my eyes to what I've been missing. That's not to say I'm going to start playing every horror game out there all of a sudden. I doubt my old ass unk heart could take that kind of punishment, but I do have a new appreciation for the genre. The Platinum Trophy for The Evil Within is a real test of your skills and knowledge of the game, but I think the very generous checkpoint system makes this slightly easier than we may have all been led to believe. That said, Akumu mode can be extremely annoying and frustrating, because you'll likely die hundreds of times, and that's not an exaggeration. I died 244 times on Akumu mode, and that's low compared to some screenshots I've seen. I think survival difficulty is a perfect challenge for a game like this, but Akumu just takes it a little bit too far in my opinion. When enemies have guns and explosive crossbows and marksman level accuracy, and everything kills you in one hit, you'll experience a lot of cheap and rapid deaths in Akumu mode. I might feel differently if the game had a proper cover mechanic and less wonky controls, but as it is, this is a frustrating platinum to earn. I definitely recommend any horror fan play through this on survival, maybe even with no upgrades for a tough but fair challenge, but I would only recommend this platinum to true trophy hunting sadists who have the patience of a Tibetan monk. Game number 3, if you haven't figured it out by now, is Outlast 2. Outlast is a series I intentionally avoided for years because I knew it was scary as hell, but like The Evil Within and Dead Space 2, I didn't want fear to be a reason I avoided a hard platinum trophy. After all, it's just a game, right? Similar to Dead Space 2 and The Evil Within, there's really just one trophy that makes the Outlast 2 Platinum so notoriously difficult. The Messiah trophy is earned for beating the game on an insane difficulty, without reloading the camera battery. Insane mode is a permadeath mode where you start over from the beginning if you die. Add to this not being able to reload your camera battery, and it's clear that this is a trophy that was designed to make you anxious. The difficulty of this trophy will be easier to comprehend when we talk about the gameplay of the Outlast games, but first I had to do some preparation. I generally try to start any new game series from the beginning, or at least as early in the series as I can, and since I never played Outlast 1, I started there. Even though Outlast 1 and 2 aren't directly connected in terms of the story, they're obviously very similar games with similar mechanics and fear tactics. They also have similar trophy requirements, but Outlast 1 is shorter and easier to finish, so I figured it would be a good warm-up for Outlast 2. I did a casual blind run first, which I try to do with every new game, followed by a quick run on Nightmare to grab all the collectibles and learn what speedrun strats I could, and finally I topped it off with an Insane Mode run. Thanks to some video guides I found on YouTube, I was actually able to beat Insane Mode on Outlast 1 on my first try, so I was feeling confident. Outlast 1 taught me a lot about mechanics and strategies, and I just hoped this would translate well into my upcoming experience with its sequel. It's too bad Outlast 1 doesn't have a Platinum Trophy, but I'm still glad I played it because it was a solid game overall. It already felt a lot scarier than The Evil Within and Dead Space 2 for reasons I'll get to a bit later. My hands were sweaty and my heart was racing for a large part of my first playthrough, and some of the jump scares legitimately had me jumping out of my seat and borderline shitting my pants. I'd be lying if I described this as a fun experience, but I knew it was necessary to jump into the pit of fear headfirst if I ever wanted to have a chance at getting Outlast 2's Platinum Trophy. Right out of the gate, Outlast 2 sets the stage for its story by telling you exactly who you are and what your mission is. You play as Blake Langerman, a cameraman investigating the murder of a young pregnant woman, along with your wife Lynn, a journalist. You're flying over a remote area in the Arizona desert when the helicopter you're in crashes. You wake up beside the crashed chopper with no idea where Lynn or the pilot are. You find the pilot rather quickly and, well, he's not doing so well. Armed with nothing more than your camera, you quickly find yourself in a town of cultists who think you and Lynn are parents of the Antichrist. Pretty dramatic if I must say so. As you navigate through the town, you start to learn disturbing information about its inhabitants. The people in the town are devoutly religious, going so far as to kill their own children in the name of their devotion, at the orders of the town's cult leader, Sullivan Noth. Dead bodies, both intact and dismembered, litter homes and common areas. As the story progresses, you'll be introduced to other sects or offshoots of this cult, including one known as the Heretics, which is essentially a rival faction to the cult, and the Skald, a group of syphilis-plagued worshippers who believe that Blake is the second coming of Christ. 3 crazy cults that are obsessed with the end times, and all 3 are convinced that you and Lynn play an important role. You spend most of the game trying to find and save Lynn. Noth announces to the town that Lynn is pregnant with the Antichrist, which has Blake in disbelief. Lynn escapes the cult at the start of the game, but is quickly captured by the Heretics. On your mission to find Lynn, you come across some truly disturbing scenes and spend a lot of time either hiding or running for your life. Simultaneously, Blake has recurring flashbacks and hallucinations of a childhood friend, Jessica, who died tragically at a young age at the Catholic school they both attended. Blake's guilt over her death haunts him throughout the game, literally and figuratively, and recurring themes of forgiveness, guilt, and sin are peppered throughout your journey. It's heavily implied that the Murkoff Corporation, which is more prominent in the first Outlast game, plays a major role in the strange occurrences in this region. Multiple times throughout the game, you hear loud horns followed by bright lights. Signs of the apocalypse, from swarms of locusts to raining blood, manifest as you approach the end of the game. Is it the end of days, or just mind tricks? The game leaves quite a bit open to interpretation at the end, and the details about what's real and what's imagined is tied into the other games in the series, which may be hard to follow if you haven't played them. Many details of Outlast 2's plot are revealed through collectible items. Documents can be picked up and events can be recorded using Blake's camera. These can then be reviewed at any time using the touchpad. There are tons of games that do this kind of thing, including Dead Space 2 and The Evil Within, where you have to find collectible texts, recordings, audio logs, etc., in order to fully understand everything that's going on in the story. I'm really bad at following these kinds of things, personally, especially in a game like Outlast 2. When I'm sneaking through an area of psychotic madmen that want to crucify me, and I pick up a document, it's hard for me to turn down the anxiety and sit there and read a long document. It's a little immersion breaking for me. Even in first-person shooters like Wolfenstein 2, it's hard for me to stop what I'm doing in order to sit there for a few minutes to read every single document in order to get all these little details. Oftentimes I just pick these things up and barely look at them, especially if they're long reads. Audio logs are nice because they play in the background. I don't need to stop what I'm doing to get those details. I'm not necessarily complaining about this kind of video game storytelling. I think it can be an effective way to provide context, and a lot of games do it. I'm just saying it's hard for me to fully take in details of a game's story this way. Outlast 2 makes it very convenient by putting all these collectibles in a menu that can then be organized chronologically and reviewed at a later time. It was very easy to go through these at the end of the game and soak up all these additional details. Oftentimes I have to rely on outside sources like Wikipedia, Reddit, or others to gain a better understanding of a game's story, but this collectible menu in Outlast 2 went a long way in helping me understand what's actually going on. I had my own theories about what was really going on in this game while I played through it multiple times, but the collectibles and other online sources revealed things to me that I hadn't even considered. Outlast 2 is a relatively short game, and figuring out what's going on in this messed up desert is part of the purpose of playing it in the first place, so I don't want to spoil too much, but it's a thrilling, albeit sometimes confusing ride. Outlast 2 makes it abundantly clear from the start that you are not some souped-up, gun-toting hero. You're just a guy with a camera. You have no weapons and no means to fight or protect yourself. If an enemy spots you, your only choices are to run, hide, or die, and you'll likely be doing all 3 quite often in Outlast 2. The gameplay in both Outlast 1 and 2 are very simple. You can sprint, but unlike Outlast 1 where you could sprint indefinitely, in Outlast 2 you only have a limited amount of stamina before you get fatigued. Even worse, you have no visual indicators for when your stamina will run out. If you run out of stamina while running, your character will automatically start to move very slowly. Your controller will vibrate and the screen will shake a little, which tells you that you need to slow down or stop and rest to recharge your stamina. But there's no other way to tell how much stamina you have. This proved very frustrating to manage, as running out of stamina while you're being chased is an easy way to get caught and die. You can hide in closets, barrels, underneath beds, and even underwater to avoid enemy detection. In most cases, hiding involves sprinting into a building or room, closing the door, and finding a good hiding spot inside before the chasing enemy bursts in and catches you. Doors can also be locked in Outlast 2, which is new, and this will give you a few extra seconds to hide before an enemy can break through it. You'll be doing a lot of hiding in Outlast 2, so you'll become very familiar with these features even on a casual playthrough. As mentioned earlier, you carry a video camera which serves two purposes. The first and most obvious purpose of the camera is to record footage. By recording certain events, those events will be maintained in the collectibles menu. The other feature that actually makes the camera a necessary life-saving tool is its night vision setting. By pressing R3, the camera will switch to night vision mode, which allows you to see in the dark. This is absolutely essential in any Outlast 2 playthrough, considering some areas are completely pitch black. Without night vision, all you can do is guess where to go, and with sadistic cult members chasing after you, who can somehow see in the dark, the last thing you want is to get turned around or lost. The downside is that the night vision drains the camera's battery, and if the battery goes completely empty, you'll have to swap it out with a new battery or continue in complete darkness. Batteries can be found throughout each area and are a lot more common on easier difficulties. The camera also has a zoom feature as well as a microphone, which is new to Outlast 2, which can be very useful in sensing nearby enemies. You can tell if enemies are far or near, or to your left or right by using the microphone. In the original launch version of the game, the microphone would drain the battery, but thank Noth, they patched this out and now it can be used freely with no penalty. Recording events as collectibles and the use of night vision are both features that were present in Outlast 1, and in general, the gameplay of Outlast 2 is very similar to its predecessor. One of the new features of gameplay in Outlast 2 is the bandage consumable. In Outlast 1, your health would regenerate if you took non-lethal damage. In Outlast 2, some light damage will heal on its own, but most damage will need to be healed manually using a bandage. Like batteries, bandages can be found throughout each area and are also a lot more common on easier difficulties. Healing yourself with a bandage is important in keeping you alive, but it slows you down while you're actively healing. On the flip side, being hurt also makes you move more slowly, so it's imperative that you always have bandages on you and that you only use them when you've reached a safe spot. This adds to the tension of the chases in Outlast 2. If you're being chased and take damage, you'll start to slow down, but you have to keep running until you reach a safe point before you can heal. In many cases, taking damage during a chase will automatically lead to failure shortly after, as enemies will be able to catch you easier. Ideally, you want to try and avoid all damage if you can. That's about all there is to know about Outlast 2's gameplay mechanics. In terms of actually playing the game, both Outlast 1 and 2 are riddled with tension. Enemies have set patrol routes and always spawn in the same places and in the same amounts pretty much, but learning these patrol routes and their alertness levels is what brings a bit of challenge to the game. Sprinting, stepping on glass, moving objects, or doing other loud actions will alert enemies to your presence, and it initiates a panic in you to either run or find a hiding spot immediately. Auditory cues signal when you've made noise that is heard by a nearby enemy, and when enemies spot you, characteristically loud chase music commences, which ramps up the anxiety. The game wants you to know, hey, now is the time to run. Outlast 1 and 2 are both chock full of jump scares and anxiety-inducing chases. Outlast 1 felt scarier to me, probably because Outlast 2 uses a lot of the same tricks as the first one, so I was a bit used to it by the time I got to the second game. When I played Outlast 1, my heart was beating fast constantly and I almost always had sweaty hands. I was anxious as all hell. By the time I got to Outlast 2, there was still some of that, but it was no longer new. Knowing how enemy AI worked in Outlast 1, I found myself testing what it took to escape an enemy. If I was being chased, How many corners do I need to turn before I lose the enemy? How far in front of them do I need to be before I can jump in a hiding spot without being seen? If I run into a room and close the door, how much time do I have before the enemy bursts in? All these methods of learning the enemy's patterns help you get through the game. This made me start looking at horror games more like puzzles instead of the fear-inducing survival marathons they're intended to be. Most enemies in video games, not just horror games but games in general, have set spawns and set patrols. Even if there is some variability, you generally know what to expect after the first time. Fundamentally, this game is a lot like Pac-Man. Stay with me now, I know this is a bit of a stretch, but you have to get from point A to B to C, usually through a maze of turns with no offensive tools. You can bait enemies towards you in order to slip past them, but the goal is actually to avoid interaction as much as possible. Horror games often build tension with jump scares and auditory crescendos before exposing their secrets like patrol routes of enemies, which is often what makes them so scary. But once you're past that initial jump scare and you look at the game for what it is, a set of coded objects following specific rules, you realize it's not as scary as it looks once you understand those rules. A big factor in what makes both of these Outlast games so nerve-wracking is the audio design. Both games are very quiet, leading up to jump scares and chases. Dead silence is something I absolutely dread in real life. I've slept with a fan on every night since I was a child. I almost always have some kind of noise playing in the background at home, whether it's music, a TV show, or something else. Dead silence for an extended period of time automatically makes me think that a loud surprise is imminent, and the suspense of waiting for it is borderline debilitating. I hate the feeling. This is why Outlast 1 felt so stressful, and even through many playthroughs of Outlast 2 while going for the Messiah trophy, these moments always made me nervous even when I knew they were coming. The Messiah trophy requires you to complete the whole game on insane difficulty without reloading the camera battery. The first Outlast game had a trophy for beating the game on insane, but for some reason, unbeknownst to me, only the Xbox version has an achievement for beating it without reloading the battery. So I was able to use as much night vision as I needed to get through it and earn the 100%. I even managed to do it first try, thanks to a video guide from YouTuber iFreems. He's got some great speedrun guides, especially for the Outlast games, so I recommend you check those out if you need help. Outlast 2 is substantially longer than Outlast 1. Whereas Outlast 1 only took me about an hour and a half to clear on Insane, Outlast 2 will take you 2.5 to 3 hours. To do it without reloading the camera battery a single time is a true test that only the most experienced Outlast 2 players will be able to achieve. I couldn't find a definitive answer online as to how long a full battery lasts, so I tested it for myself. After about 2.5 minutes of cumulative use, the camera's night vision will start to flicker on and off, and at around the 3-minute mark, the battery will be completely empty. To my surprise though, the night vision doesn't actually turn off when the battery runs out. Instead, the screen starts to get blurry, reducing how far ahead you can see, while also taking away the ability to use the microphone. While it's technically still usable for much longer, realistically, you only have about 3 minutes of quality night vision to work with. 3 minutes out of a 2.5 hour playthrough. This requires you to be incredibly picky with where you use it. Instead of turning it on and leaving it on, you have to just flash it on and off briefly to see where you're going. At roughly the halfway point, the camera will be taken from you. When you get it back, the battery will be at around 60% full no matter how much you may have used it up until that point. This is strange, they don't really explain the reasons for it in the game. This means that you can technically use an entire full battery up to this point and get another one back at 60% at the halfway point. Unfortunately, all the darkest parts in the game are in the second half, so the benefit here is rather limited. You can easily make it all the way to the half point without using night vision a single time. There are some parts late in the game where you'll need to rely on night vision quite a bit, so it's imperative that you minimize its use as much as possible until then. This requires a deep knowledge of each area so that you can get through less dangerous but dark areas without wasting the battery. The last thing you want is to be approaching the very end of the game, only for the battery to die and leave you in a chase through a dark cave with no way to see. On insane difficulty, bosses will kill you in 1 hit, and standard enemies will kill you in 2. After the first hit from a standard enemy, your movement speed slows, so oftentimes even getting hit once can be a run ender. You really need to know all the enemy patrol routes as well as the safest way of getting by them. One complicating factor that makes this trophy so difficult, or more accurately so tedious, is a plethora of unskippable cutscenes in the first 60 to 70 minutes of the game. Just in the first 20 to 30 minutes alone, you have 3 or 4 lengthy cutscenes or slow walking sections that can't be skipped. This gave me PTSD flashbacks to Wolfenstein 2's Mein Leben mode and Max Payne 3's New York Minute Hardcore mode, which both had many lengthy cutscenes at the start of the game. This makes every failure that much more frustrating, because you have to sit through the same dialogue over and over. When much of the game is focused on sprinting from point A to point B quickly, being forced to stop for lengthy pauses at a time was not a fun experience, and it added to the tension every time I got deep into a run. Not only that, but all the hardest parts of an insane run don't pop up until you're at least 1 hour into the game, with the most difficult parts being closer to the 2-hour mark. It took me 9 tries to beat this mode, and 6 of my failures occurred past the 1 hour mark. So I spent quite a bit of time trying and failing to beat this. I also ran into some very frustrating bugs. My 3rd attempt was going incredibly well, and shortly after getting through one of the hardest parts of the game, almost 2 hours in, I somehow fell through the map, which instantly ended my run and brought me to the main menu. I was absolutely furious. I had 2 more runs that ended by what I can only describe as bugs or deficiencies in the game. I refuse to take responsibility for these, and they really just made me incredibly annoyed and frustrated. In one case, my guy walked off a ledge instead of shimmying across it.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
And this was about 1 hour and 45 minutes into the run. In another instance, he refused to grab a ledge after a jump, which I seem to have executed perfectly, exactly as I had done 7 times prior. This was only about 25 minutes in, so it wasn't a huge loss, but it was still annoying. It's one thing for a game to be challenging, and it's another for a game to have a permadeath mode that takes multiple hours to beat. But to fail a run in a way that is clearly outside of my control, well, that's just infuriating. Now, onto the specifics. There are a few notably difficult sections of the insane run that you'll want to be prepared for. The first one is this section with Marta, a boss that constantly stalks you, where you have to push this cart to the wall, then climb on top of it and jump over the wall. I struggled with this bit a lot on my first blind playthrough on Nightmare, but once I started following the speedrun guide from iFrames, I never failed here once on Insane. It's pretty easy, to be honest. There are some glitches that you can use to despawn enemies and bypass certain areas in the game, including this cart section. But as I mentioned while covering The Evil Within, I'm not doing that for games in this series, but honestly, like I said, this part is pretty simple if you know what to do. The first real challenging part, in my opinion, is when you meet Nick and Laird. These f***ing assholes, Jesus f***ing Christ. These guys are found in the Scald Village about 1 hour into the run. Nick is this giant, hulking, dim-witted motherfucker, and Laird is this annoying, f***ing, disease-ridden midget that somehow is more accurate with a bow and arrow than f***ing Legolas. Sorry for my anger, it's just, these guys were so annoying to get past, and I died 3 times in the same exact spot to these assholes. There are some safer methods of getting through this area, but there's still some luck involved. At some point, you'll have to either sprint through this section and pray you don't get hit by an arrow, or try and bait Laird into firing an arrow before inching to the next bit of cover, and repeating that until you make it all the way through. If you're sticking out in any way or don't make it to cover in time, you'll get hit with an arrow for an instant death. If you look at any forum where people are talking about their insane runs, almost everybody struggles with this section. Unfortunately, there seems to be a bit of luck involved with the entire Nick and Laird section, even if you have the perfect strategy memorized. A little later, you'll come to this section where it's raining blood. This is where I'd queue up some Slayer if I didn't have to worry about copyright strikes. But in this part, you have 2 long chases that will stress the limits of your stamina meter. On one attempt, I ran out of stamina in the first chase and took non-lethal damage. And on my successful run, I took non-lethal damage in the second chase. Both instances made my heart jump into my throat. In both runs, I made sure to rest up and get full stamina before attempting both chases. And yet I still ran out of stamina twice and got hit. I don't really understand it, to be honest. The guides I see online say that you have enough stamina to make it through these chases, but I'm not convinced because, like I said, I waited a long time before starting these chases just to make sure I had full stamina, and yet I still ran out and got hit. The best thing you can do is keep sprinting and hope you make it to safety on the other side. There's a short part around here where you have to traverse through a library and a school as part of a flashback/hallucination. This part can be really tough. You have to navigate a small maze in complete darkness while a boss chases you. So you have to be very familiar with it and minimize your night vision as much as possible. I never failed here thanks to the guide I was using, I did, however, watch this section over and over again to make sure I knew exactly where to go. The last hard part of the run, in my opinion, is the mines. In addition to being hard, this is where the game starts to get very dark, and you'll have to rely on night vision quite a bit. This is the part I was most anxious about on every single run. This took me forever to get through on my first playthrough on Nightmare. There are multiple enemies that are fast and aggressive, and you're stuck in these very long, narrow corridors. You can't simply sprint past enemies like you can earlier in the game. You need to bait enemies away, hide from them, and then sneak behind and then past them. In my opinion, this chase in the mines is the single hardest part of the entire run, due to just how cramped it is. Immediately after this is where the game dropped me through the map for an instant fail on my third attempt. I will say that the strategy from iFreems is very reliable in this chase part, so I highly recommend you practice this section over and over using either that strategy or something similar until you can repeatedly get through it safely. You do not want to fail a run here as you approach the 2-hour mark. After that chase, you'll eventually be chased by Val, the leader of the heretics. This part is almost completely pitch black, so this is where you'll be using most of your remaining night vision. The first part where you activate the switches is pretty simple. Even though it's dark, she follows a very strict path, and as long as you don't alert her, you can easily sneak by her, activate the switches, and move on. The final chase with her has you crawling through very small crevices in the dark, and you'll need a lot of night vision for this part. These are very tight spaces where you go between crawling, crouching, and standing, and even on my successful run, I got caught on multiple edges to the point where I just started to yell at my TV. Nervous that I'd get caught. I'm not sure how I made it through with the multiple snags that I hit, but luckily I survived. At this point, my nerves were through the roof. I was pausing the game every few minutes to review the guide I was following, making sure I knew exactly when I needed to use night vision and where I needed to turn. I was so scared of failing the run in the final stretch, and I didn't want to take any chances. I made it through the mines with very little battery left and had just one short boss chase left. This last chase is easy on paper, but it's important to note that this boss can cut you off and ruin your run right at the end. I rewatched this multiple times and made absolutely sure that I waited 1 full second before starting the chase. If you go too quickly, the boss can make an early turn and pop out in front of you. This was much more nerve-wracking than the Frau Engel bit at the end of the Mein Leben run. The ending of Mein Leben is honestly hard to fail. All you have to do is run forward a few feet and press melee. This one, however, can easily be failed if your timing is off by just a hair. If you go too slow, she'll catch you, but if you go too quickly, she'll take a different path and cut you off. Once I got through that, the Messiah trophy was pretty much guaranteed. I still found myself extremely paranoid that my game would somehow crash, which is known to happen with Outlast 2, but after a few short cutscenes, I popped the Messiah trophy, as well as trophies for completing the game on Insane, and for completing it in under 4 hours. The true difficulty of the Messiah trophy comes down to staying calm under the pressure. The real enemy is your nerves. As you get further into the run, you'll likely get more nervous, which can make it hard to be accurate with your movements. I had a few instances where I took damage in a spot where I'd never taken damage before. This really kept me on my toes because it showed me that even the safe parts of the run are not guaranteed. If your timing is off just a little bit, or you press the wrong button for a split second, you can lose the run. If you can stay calm and focused, this is not a trophy that requires an immense amount of skill. It does, however, require a lot of practice and memorization. I highly recommend you find 1 or 2 video guides, study them, and practice these strategies on Nightmare difficulty using chapter select before diving into an Insane run. The other massively helpful tip I can give is to turn up the brightness in the game's settings, as well as turning up the brightness or gamma on your monitor or TV. Changing my actual monitor settings made a huge difference in visibility and allowed me to see some very dark areas much easier. In terms of difficulty rating, I think I would give this a 7.5 out of 10. Like I said, it doesn't require an immense amount of skill, but it does take time, patience, and calm nerves. There are tons of easy ways to fail or die, and some of them feel outside of your control. This makes the platinum very annoying and frustrating, but not necessarily extremely difficult. In terms of time, it took me 10 hours to earn all the trophies except for the 4 I earned on my final run. It took an additional 16 hours to complete Messiah, for a total of 26 hours to platinum. I probably would have had it in 14 to 16 hours total if I had not had the run ending bug on attempt number 3, but 26 hours is still not too bad for a challenging platinum. Getting Messiah will ensure you get the bulk of the game's trophies. You'll most likely earn the speedrun trophy on your Messiah run as well, but this can be easily gotten in a new playthrough on story difficulty where the game is much easier. 4 hours is a very generous amount of time to clear Outlast 2, once you know where to go in each section. There's a trophy called Profit for beating the game without hiding in any barrels or closets. I actually got this on my first playthrough on Nightmare, but only because I was intentionally trying to avoid them for the trophy. That said, this should be very easy to do on story difficulty and just speeding through the game. There are 4 trophies tied to collectibles, which can be mopped up using chapter select after you complete the game once. Unlike Outlast 1, where you had to get all collectibles in a single run, Outlast 2 lets you load a previous save to import your collectibles into chapter select. This made the collectibles much easier to get and didn't require a full dedicated playthrough. In general, these are pretty easy to find. I got most of these on my first run just by playing the game. There are 5 miscellaneous trophies that, while easy, are just a tad grindy for how short this game is. There's a trophy for using 10 bandages in a single playthrough, which I somehow didn't get on my first blind playthrough on Nightmare difficulty, so I just started a new game on story difficulty and sped through it in order to clean this one up. Another trophy requires you to crawl for 500 meters. This is very easy and only takes about 10 minutes. You'll be crawling a lot in Outlast 2, but 500 meters is just a bit too far to get this through natural play. Similarly, the trophy for holding your breath underwater for 10 whole minutes is another that you probably won't get naturally, but it's very easy to farm in the lake section. Just make sure you don't accidentally drown yourself. There's a trophy for sliding 12 meters in blood, which is also very easy but can only be done in a very specific spot in Chapter 3. Lastly, another easy trophy requires you to use the camera's microphone for 20 minutes. This is very easy, especially now that the microphone doesn't drain the battery. You can use this for the entire playthrough if you wish. It'll help you keep track of enemy positions, but annoyingly, it shuts itself off pretty regularly, so you have to toggle it back on. If you're a purist who doesn't like using guides, well, I wish you good luck on this platinum, and I respect anyone who manages to pull it off. I myself have no qualms with using strategy guides. I've been using them since the 90s, and they're especially useful for finding optimal strategies in a permadeath run. I highly recommend finding a Messiah guide and studying it like you're prepping for the ACTs. Like I mentioned earlier, I use this guide by iFrames for most of my runs, but I did have to modify it in a few places. For starters, he recommends sprinting through this Nick and Laird section, but this killed me whenever I tried it. Likewise, in that guide, he says you don't need night vision in this mine crawling section, but this is where I fell through the map and failed the run. These aren't knocks on him or his guide, but like I said earlier, I think the game has a very small amount of randomness and luck involved, so what works for one may not work 100% of the time for you. I also mentioned this in my Wolfenstein 2 video when talking about Mein Leben. It's always worth checking more than one guide and seeing what works best for you. This is also why it's imperative to practice these strategies. Outlast 1 didn't have chapter select, so you couldn't practice individual sections, unless you had a manual save. Outlast 2 has a very fleshed out chapter select, allowing you to practice different sections within each chapter, so use it to your advantage before committing to a Messiah run. I also used a guide to grab all the collectibles, but Outlast 2 has such a good collectibles menu that you might be able to get all of these naturally. You can sort the collectibles all together chronologically or by chapter. The collectibles are also numbered. This means that if you have collectibles 94 and 96, and you can see that both of these are in the early parts of the mines, you can narrow down where your missing collectible is in the middle. There are a few that are well hidden, but Outlast 2 is a very linear game. With a little bit of exploring, you could probably find all these without any help. I think Outlast 2 would just barely crack my top 10 hardest platinum trophies. Off the top of my head, I think it would be somewhere in the 8 to 10 range. I think it will be surpassed by future games in the series, and I do think it's more frustrating and annoying than insanely difficult. See what I did there? But it's definitely a challenge. It made me a lot more nervous than The Evil Within, but I don't necessarily think it's harder. Likewise, I think Dead Space 2 also requires more skill to platinum than Outlast 2, so I would put both of those games above this one. Outlast 2 has no downloadable content and no additional modes or collectibles outside of what's already required for the Platinum Trophy. It's a compact, standalone experience, which is a welcome change for completionists who don't want to spend a ton of extra time or money outside of the base game. Don't go for this Platinum Trophy. Seriously, save yourself the stress, play it casually, enjoy it as a game, but don't ruin yourself over the Platinum unless you're obsessed like me.
Maybe I've just been doing too many permadeath or semi-permadeath modes lately, but this game really had me annoyed and frustrated while going for the Messiah trophy. I feel strongly that 3 of my 9 failures were not my fault, and they likely added an extra 10 hours to my platinum time. Most of Outlast 2 is high quality. It looks good, it's scary, and for most of the experience it runs fine. My only real issue with this game and platinum experience is that it requires you to play perfectly while being imperfect itself. Even the rarest technical shortcomings can lead to immense frustration when combined with a trophy like Messiah that requires perfection. I've also heard of multiple cases of the game crashing during Messiah runs, which thankfully didn't happen to me, but it further proves my point. I enjoyed the first playthrough, and I enjoyed diving deeper into the story through the collectibles. I don't even have a problem with the ambiguity of the story. In fact, I thought the ending to Outlast 1 was much more odd than Outlast 2. I just think Outlast 1 is an overall better and scarier game. By the time I got the Platinum Trophy in Outlast 2, I was ready to delete this game from my hard drive and never play it again. I think it's good enough to play casually, but not good enough or polished enough to suffer over the Platinum Trophy. So there you have it, guys, another entry in the Hard Platinum series and another 3 games completed. These 3 Platinums were all challenging for different reasons, and I'm proud to add them to my collection. But I think I've played enough horror games in the past 5 months to last me a while. That brings the total number of completed games to 11 out of 40. Let me know if there's a specific game or set of games on this list you want to see me tackle next. I have some thoughts on the next video, but if there's a suggestion that gets a lot of likes, maybe I'll go with that one instead. Of course, Crypt of the Necrodancer is going to be the last one, so don't even think about suggesting that one quite yet. Anyway, that's it for this one. Thank you all for checking out my videos and helping me grow the channel. I greatly appreciate it, and I'm super excited to keep the momentum going forward into the future. Please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and keep hunting, trophy hunters.